Hello, I'm Blaze Morris. Today, we'll be talking about CVSS, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. This is a scoring system that gives a numerical value to the severity of a vulnerability, and it's used by many anti-malware programs. Today, I will cover what categories are used to determine the score, how to read a CVSS output, and how to calculate the score based on that output. Today, I'm taking you on a one-way trip to the whiteboard. I need as much space as I can get to explain everything. The base Common Vulnerability Scoring System uses 11 categories of criteria to determine the vulnerability score. The first 5 categories, the exploitability metrics, are attack vector, attack complexity, attack requirements, privileges required, and user interaction. The other 6 are known as the impact metrics, which are confidentiality, integrity, and availability, measured for the vulnerable system and subsequent systems. Let's start with exploitability metrics. The attack vector is an assessment of how close you need to be to the vulnerable system to exploit the vulnerability. If the vulnerability is rated N, or network, that means it's accessible remotely. If it's rated A, or adjacent, that means you can access it by just being nearby. If it's rated L, or local, it's an exploit that requires you to interact with something directly connected to the system, such as the keyboard. If the rating is P, or physical, the vulnerability requires you to directly touch the hardware in order to exploit it. Attack complexity has to do with whether or not you need to modify the exploit in order to circumvent security controls. If it's given a score of low, that means no customization is needed, and the attack is easily repeatable. If it's given a score of high, that means the attack requires target-specific modification in order to bypass controls. Attack requirements is basically what kind of configuration the system needs to have in order for the vulnerability to be exploited. If it's an N, or none, that means the system is exploitable with the default configuration. If it's a P, or present, the system is only vulnerable under certain configurations or circumstances not entirely within the attacker's control. Privileges required is what kind of account access you need in order to exploit the vulnerability. None is no account needed. Low means an attacker needs the privileges you get with a normal account in order to exploit the vulnerability. High means the attacker would need high level or even full access to the vulnerable system in order to change the settings and files. User interaction is the need for people other than the attacker to interact with the vulnerable machine to carry out the attack. None would mean that only the attacker needs to interact with the system. Passive means that some interaction from the targeted user is required on the system. This is something simple, like getting the target user to open a file you emailed them. Active means that you require some specific actions from the target user, like asking them to change a setting or put a file in a specific directory. Alright, on to the 6 impact metrics, starting with the confidentiality of the vulnerable and subsequent systems. By the way, all impact metrics are rated none, low, or high. In the case of confidentiality, high would mean that exploiting the vulnerability leads to a complete loss of confidentiality or disclosure of highly sensitive data. Low would mean that the vulnerability leads to a disclosure of some restricted information that does not have a huge impact. None means that no restricted data is disclosed on the vulnerable or subsequent system. Integrity has to do with an attacker's ability to modify information after a successful exploit. High means that the attacker can modify any or all files on the vulnerable or subsequent system. Low means that the attacker has a limited ability to modify files. None means that the integrity of the files is unaffected. Availability has to do with an attack's effect on a legitimate user's ability to access the information as needed. High means that the legitimate users are denied access, and this state is sustained or persistent. Low means that performance is reduced and interruptions happen, but legitimate users can still access information. None, of course, means the attack has no effect on availability. Alright, let's get into reading a CVSS string. Here is a CVSS string. Crazy, right? Not really. These are just the 11 categories we were talking about earlier. Let me split it up for you. These 5 are the exploitability metrics: the attack vector, complexity, requirements, privileges, and user interaction. These 3 are the impact metrics for the vulnerable system. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are all rated L. Finally, these 3 are the impact metrics for subsequent systems, all rated N. Given this string, we can tell that the vulnerability is pretty easily exploitable, has a low level of impact on the vulnerable system, and does not have any effect on subsequent systems. So, how would we score this vulnerability? Luckily, we don't have to figure it out on our own. This is the CVSS calculator. I left a link to it in the description so you could join along. Let's plug in the values from the string into this calculator. As you can see, putting in just the exploitability values does not raise the score if there's no impact metrics. It's kind of like if I could steer a meteor with my mind, but it was the size of a pebble once it landed. A crazy exploit, sure, but it didn't do anything. Once we plug in the impact values, we get a score of 5.3, a medium-level vulnerability. Here's a table showing ranges of CVSS scores and their associated severity ratings. A 0 means it has a severity of none. Anything greater than 0 but less than 4 is low. Between a 4 and a 6.9 is medium. Between a 7 and an 8.9 is high. And any vulnerability between a 9 and 10 has a severity rating of critical. If you scroll down on this website, you will see that there are many other optional values we didn't discuss. In Part 2, I will cover all of these other categories, explaining their purpose and impact on the overall score. Thanks for watching my video. Now that I'm back, I plan on releasing a new video once every 2 weeks, Mondays at 6 p.m. That means you should expect to see Part 2 of this video on Monday, February 23rd at 6 p.m. Eastern. Don't worry about missing it. I'll always post on my LinkedIn as soon as I upload something. If we aren't connected, you can hit the bell after subscribing on YouTube to be notified of my uploads. The 2 works I cited in this presentation are the CVSS 4.0 specification sheet from first.org and the CVSS calculator on the National Institute of Standards and Technology website.